On February, the dragon looked up. In the twilight, in a secluded place in the town called Mudping Alley, there was a thin and lonely young man. At this time, according to the custom, he held a candle in one hand and a peach branch in the other, illuminating the beams, walls, wooden beds, etc., and knocking with peach branches, beating, trying to drive away snake, scorpions, centipedes, etc., is an old saying passed down from generation to generation in this small town. On February, the candle shines on the beam, the peach hits the wall, and there is nowhere for snakes and insects to hide in the world. The boy's surname is Chen. His name is Pingon, and his parents died young. The town's porcelain is very famous. Since the founding of the dynasty, it has taken on the important task of supervising the burning of sacrificial utensils for mausoleums. There are court officials stationed here all year round to supervise the affairs of official kilns. A helpless young man, he became a porcelain kiln maker very early. At first, he could only do some chores and rough work. After working hard for a few years with a bad-tempered halfway master, he just figured out a little way to make porcelain. As a result, things were fickle, and the town suddenly lost the amulet made by the official kiln. Dozens of kilns around the town that looked like crouching dragons were all shut down overnight by the government. Chen Pingon put down the newly folded peach branch, blew out the candle, walked out of the room, sat on the steps, looked up, and the starry sky was shining brightly. The young man still clearly remembers that the old master, surnamed Yao, who only accepted himself as a half-apprentice, was found sitting on a small bamboo chair facing the kiln head in the early morning in the late autumn last year, with his eyes closed. However, there are very few people who are as sharp as Yao Old Man. The small-town artisans who have only been able to burn porcelain for generations neither dared to presume to burn official tribute kilns, nor dared to sell the stored porcelain to the people privately, had to find another way out. And 14-year-old Chen Pingon was also kicked out. After returning to Naiping Lane, he continued to guard the dilapidated old house. It was almost a bleak scene with 4 walls. After being a lonely ghost wandering around for a while, the young man really couldn't find a way to earn money. With that little savings, the young man could barely fill his stomach. A few days ago, I heard about the Keelong Lane a few streets away. An old blacksmith surnamed Ruin came and announced that he would recruit 7 or 8 blacksmith apprentices without any wages. But he would take care of the food. Chen Pingon hurried to try his luck, rejecting him. Chen Pingon wondered at the time, is it possible that blacksmithing is not based on the strength of the arm, but on the quality of the face? You must know that although Chen Pingon looks weak, his strength should not be underestimated. This is the physical foundation trained by the young people in those years of burning porcelain. In addition, Chen Pingon also followed the old man surnamed Yao and ran all over the town. 100 miles of mountains, rivers, and rivers. I have tasted the taste of various soils around me. It's a pity that Lao Yao never liked Chen Pingon and disliked the lack of comprehension of the young man. It was because the Elmwood was not enlightened, and he was far inferior to the eldest apprentice, Liu Xianyang. It was no wonder that the old man was biased. Liu Xianyang's skill in just half a year is equivalent to the level of Chen Pingon's 3 years of hard work. Although he may not need the skill in his life, Chen Pingon still closed his eyes as usual, imagining that there were bluestone slabs and a reel in front of him, and began to practice drawing. Practice makes perfect. About every quarter of an hour, the teenager would rest for a while, shaking his wrists, and repeating the cycle until he was completely exhausted. No one has ever taught Chen Pingon these things. It's a way he figured out blindly. The heaven and the earth were originally quiet, but Chen Pingon heard a harsh, sarcastic laughter and stopped. And sure enough, he saw the same age squatting on the wall, grinning, and did not hide his contempt. This person is Chen Pingon's old neighbor, and it is said that he is the illegitimate son of the former superintendent. The adult was afraid of clear criticism and impeachment by officials. Finally, he returned to the capital alone to report his duties, and handed the child over to a successor official who had a lot of personal friendship. Watch over. Nowadays, the town has somehow lost the qualification of official kiln firing, and the supervisor, who is in charge of supervising the kiln affairs for the imperial court, has no way of protecting himself. Go to the capital to make some connections. Unconsciously, the neighbor boy, who has become an abandoned child, still lives a leisurely life. He takes his personal maid all day long, wandering around the town inside and outside the town. The walls of the lowest courtyards in every household in Mupin Alley are very low. In fact, the neighbor boy can see the scene of the courtyard here without standing on tiptoe. But every time he talks to Chen Pingon, he prefers to squat on the wall. Compared with the vulgar name of Chen Pingon, the neighbor boy is much more elegant, called Song Jixin, and even his maid, who lives with him, also has the name of Wen Xuan Jigui. The girl was standing on the other side of the courtyard wall at this moment. She had a pair of almond eyes and was timid and weak. There was a voice from the courtyard gate. "Do you sell this maid?" Song Jixin was stunned for a while, then turned his head to look at the voice. It was a smiling young man in brocade, standing outside the courtyard with a completely unfamiliar face. BSP. Beside the young man in brocade clothes stood a tall old man with a fair face and kind expression. Squinting his eyes slightly to look at the 2 young men and women in the adjacent courtyard, the old man's eyes swept across Chen Pingon without stagnation. But on Song Jixin and the maid, there were many stops, and the smile gradually became stronger. Song Jixin squinted. "Sell. Why don't you sell? The boy smiled and said, Then tell me a price. The girl's eyes widened, her face full of incredible, like a panicked young elk. Song Jiksen rolled his eyes, stretched out a finger, and shook it. 1 taels of silver. The brocade-clothed young man's face was as usual. He nodded and said, Okay. Seeing that the young man didn't seem to be joking, Song Jiksen quickly changed his tune and said, It's gold. The corners of the brocade-clothed youth's mouth curled up and said, I'm just kidding you. Song Jiksen's face was gloomy. The brocade-clothed boy ignored Song Jiksen, shifted his gaze, and looked at Chen Ping'an. Thanks to you today, I was able to buy that carp. After I bought it back, the more I looked at it, the happier I became, thinking that I must tell you in person. Thank you. So I asked Grandpa Wu to take me to find you overnight. He threw a heavy embroidered bag to Chen Ping'an and said with a bright smile, This is a reward. You and I will be settled. Just as Chen Ping'an was about to speak, the brocade-clothed boy turned and left. Chen Ping'an frowned. During the day, I accidentally saw a middle-aged man walking on the street with a fish basket and caught a golden carp with a tail and a short palm. It was very festive, so he asked if he could buy it for 10 cents. The middle-aged man was just thinking of rewarding his own temple, seeing that it was profitable. He sat on the ground and raised the price. The lion opened his mouth and insisted on asking for 30 cents. Willing to sell. Chen Ping'an, who is shy in his pocket, has so much spare money, and he really can't bear the golden carp, so he follows the middle-aged man and thinks about cutting the price to 15 cents, even 20 cents. Just when the middle-aged man showed signs of letting go, the young man in brocade clothes and the tall old man happened to pass by. They bought the carp and the fish basket with 50 cents without saying a word. Chen Ping'an could only watch them go away, helpless, staring at the backs of the pair of grandfathers and grandsons that were walking farther and farther. Song Jiksen withdrew his fierce eyes, jumped off the wall, seemed to remember something, and said to Chen Ping'an, Do you remember the 4 feet in the first month? Chen Ping'an nodded. How can I not remember? It is just fresh in my memory. According to the customs that have been passed down in this town for hundreds of years, if there are snakes digging into their house, it is a good sign, and the owner must not expel them and kill them. On the first day of the first lunar month, Song Jiksen sat on the threshold to bask in the sun, and then a small thing commonly known as a 4-legged snake scurried into the house under his nose. Song Jiksen grabbed it and went into the yard. When I fell out, I never thought that the 4-legged snake, which had already fallen into all kinds of meat, became more and more courageous. Time and time again, Song Jiksen, who never believed in ghosts and gods, was so angry that he threw it away in a fit of anger. When he arrived at Chen Ping'an's yard, where did he expect that Song Jiksen would see the 4-legged snake curled up under his bed the next day? Song Jiksen noticed that the girl was pulling her sleeve. The boy in her had a good heart, and subconsciously swallowed the words that had already reached his mouth. What he wanted to say was that the extremely ugly 4-legged snake had a bulge on its forehead recently, like a horn on the top of its head. Song Jiksen changed his words and said, Jigui and I may be leaving here next month. Chen Ping'an sighed. Be careful on the road. Song Jiksen said half-truth and half-truths. I definitely won't be able to move some things. But don't steal things recklessly when there is no one in my house. Chen Ping'an shook his head. Song Jiksen laughed suddenly, pointed at Chen Ping'an with his finger, and said with a hilarious smile, Cowardly like a mouse. No wonder there are no noble sons in the poor family. Not to mention the poor and humble in this life and being bullied by others. Maybe they will not escape in the next life. Chen Ping'an remained silent. They went back to their houses. Chen Ping'an closed the door and lay on the hard wooden bed. The poor boy closed his eyes and whispered, Sui sweeping, sui sui an, sui sui ping, sui sui ping. The sky was slightly bright, and before the cock crowing, Chen Ping'an had already got up. The thin bedding couldn't keep the heat, and Chen Ping'an also developed the habit of getting up early and going to bed late when he was an apprentice firing porcelain. Chen Ping'an opened the door and came to the small yard with soft soil. After taking a deep breath, he stretched out and walked out of the yard. He turned his head and saw a slender figure, bent over, holding a wooden bucket of water in both hands. Her shoulders pushed open the door of her own courtyard. It was Song Jiksen's maidservant. She should have just returned from the Ironlock Well on Xinghua Lane. Chen Ping'an retracted his gaze, walked across the street, and trotted all the way to the east of the town. Mudbottle Alley was in the west of the town, and at the easternmost gate, there was a person in charge of the town's business travel and night patrols, and he usually collected and handed over the family letters sent from outside. The next thing Chen Ping'an will do is to send those letters to the people in the town. The reward is a letter and a copper coin. This is the way he finally made money. Chen Ping'an has already made an appointment there. And after the second dragon raised his head in February, he started to take over the business of this stall. In Song Jiksen's words, he was born poor, and even if he was lucky enough to enter the house, Chen Ping'an couldn't hold back. Song Jiksen often said some obscure words, probably from books, but Chen Ping'an always didn't understand. As for surviving the winter every year, but after the spring, it gets colder for a period of time. The youngsters experience it firsthand. Song Jiksen said that it is called a cold spring, and it is as powerful as a carbon on the battlefield. So many people will die in these ghost gates. The town is not surrounded by a city wall, after all, let alone bandits and thieves. There are very few thieves, therefore, it is a city gate in name, but it is actually a row of old fences that are crooked. There is such a place for pedestrians and vehicles to pass through. The face of this town, When Chen Ping'an trotted past Xinghua Alley, he saw many women and children gathered beside the iron-locked well, and the reels of the well kept creaking. Going around another street, Chen Ping'an heard a familiar sound of reading not far away. There is a village school, which was jointly funded by several big families in the town. The teacher is a foreigner, and Chen Ping'an is a small school. At times, I often ran to hide out the window, squatted secretly, and pricked up my ear. Although that gentleman was extremely strict when he taught, he did not scold or block Chen Ping'an, the children who were reading and learning. Later, Chen Ping'an went to a dragon kiln outside the town as an apprentice and never went there again. School. Going forward, Chen Ping'an passed a stone archway, because the archway building has 12 stone pillars. The local people like to call it the Crab Archway. The real name of this archway is very different from that of Song Jixin and Liu Yangxian. Song Jixin swears that in an old book called Local County Annals. It is called Dashifang, which is the royal archway given by the emperor, in order to commemorate the martial arts of a high-ranking official in history. Liu Yangxian, who is as bumpkin as Chen Ping'an, said that this is the crab workshop. We have called it for hundreds of years. There is no reason to call it a shitty university scholar's workshop. Liu Yangxian also asked Song Jixin a question. How big is the official hat of a bachelor? Is it bigger than the wellhead of the iron lock well? Song Jixin blushed when he asked. At this time, Chen Ping'an ran around the 12-legged archway. There were 4 large characters on each side, and the fonts were strange and different. Furious bullfighting, according to Song Jixin. Except for a certain 4 characters, the other 3 stone carvings on the plaques have been smeared and tampered with. Chen Ping'an was ignorant about these things and never thought deeply about them. Of course, even if the teenager wanted to get to the bottom of it, it would be futile. He didn't even know the local county annals that Song Jixin often talked about. Not long after the archway, I soon saw an old locust tree with luxuriant branches. Under the tree, there was a trunk that had been moved here by someone unknown, with 2 bluestone slabs. This big tree was used as a simple bench. Every summer, the people of the small town like to enjoy the shade here. For wealthy families, the elders will fish out a basket of iced melons and fruits from the well. When the children are full, they will form gangs and hang out in the trees. Playing in the shade, Chen Ping'an was accustomed to going up and down the mountain, ran to the gate of the fence, and stopped at the gate of the lonely yellow mud house. His heart was not beating and he was not breathing. There are not many people outside the town. It is reasonable to say that now that the money tree made by the official kiln has fallen, there will be no new faces. When Old Man Yao was alive, he once got drunk and told his apprentices Chen Ping'an and Liu Shanyang that we are the only official kiln business in the world. The royal porcelain for His Majesty the Emperor and the Empress. No matter how rich you are, no matter how big your official position is, if you dare to touch it, you will be beheaded. The Old Man Yao was very different that day. Today, Chen Ping'an looked outside the fence, but found that many people were waiting to open the city gate. No less than 7 or 8 people. Men and women, young and old, and they are all strangers. The local people in and out of the town, whether to burn porcelain or do crop work, seldom go to the east gate. The reason is very simple. Land. At this time, Chen Ping'an and the foreigners were facing each other across a wooden fence. At that moment, the boy wearing the self-made straw sandals was just a little envious of the thick clothes on those people. It must be very warm and could be frozen. The people outside the door were obviously divided into several groups. They were not a group of people, but they all looked at the thin teenagers inside the door. Most of them had indifferent expressions. Chen Ping'an was a little strange. Could it be that some people don't know that the imperial court has banned all dragon kilns? Or do they think they have an opportunity because they know the truth? There was a slender young man wearing an odd tall crown, with a green jade pendant hanging from his waist. He seemed impatient to wait. He walked out of the crowd by himself, and wanted to push open the gate of the fence that was unlocked. When his fingers were about to touch the wooden door, he suddenly stopped, slowly retracted his hand, put his hands behind him, and smiled at the boy with straw sandals inside the door. He didn't speak. He just smiled. From the corner of Chen Ping's eyes, he inadvertently noticed that the people behind the young man seemed to be disappointed, entertained, frowning, sarcastic, with subtle and different emotions. At this moment, a middle-aged man with messy hair suddenly opened the door and scolded Chen Ping'an. Little bastard, have you lost your money? I came so early to urge my life to call my soul, and you rushed to seek you after reincarnation. Damn father and mother. Chen Ping'an rolled his eyes, and the boy didn't take these harsh words seriously. When he came to live in this rural place with few books in total, if he was scolded for a few words, he would be annoyed, so he would just find a water well and jump into it. Come on down. Take it easy. Second, this middle-aged bachelor who guards the door is himself a person who is often teased and made fun of by the people in the town, especially those daring and pungent women, not to mention scolding him. There are many who beat him. In addition, this person also likes to brag to children who wear open crotch pants. For example, what Laozi was at the gate of the city, and he fought so hard that 5 or 6 big men were all over the place looking for teeth, and the ground was covered in blood. A wide road is like a muddy road on a rainy day. Angrily to Chen Ping'an, he said, I'll talk about your rubbish thing later. No one in town took this guy seriously, but whether outsiders can enter the town, men have the power to kill. As he walked towards the wooden fence door, he reached out to his crotch. The man with his back turned to Chen Ping'an. After opening the door, from time to time collects a small embroidered bag from others, puts it into his cuff, and then let him go. Chen Ping'an gave way very early. The 8 people were roughly divided into 5 groups and headed to the town. In addition to the young man wearing a high crown and a green pendant on his waist, he also walked past 2 7 or 8-year-old children, a red robe of a festive color. The girl looks pink and tender, like good china. The boy was half a head shorter than Chen Ping'an. When the child passed him, he opened his mouth. Although there was no sound, he had a clear mouth shape. It should have said 2 words, full of provocation. The middle-aged woman who was holding the boy coughed lightly, and then the child calmed down a little. The little girl behind the woman and boy was led by a burly old man with frost and snow. She turned her head and said a lot to Chen Ping'an, not forgetting to point at the boy of the same age in front of her. Chen Ping'an couldn't understand what the girl was saying, but she could guess that she was complaining. The burly old man glanced sideways at the straw shoe boy, just being glanced at intentionally or unintentionally. Chen Ping'an took a step back purely subconsciously, like a mouse sees a cat. After seeing this scene, the little girl who was chatting like a little oriole suddenly lost her interest in fanning the flames, and turned her head to stop looking at Chen Ping'an, as if one more look would stain her eyes. It's true that the young Chen Ping'an has never seen the world, but it doesn't mean that he can't understand his face. When the group of people left, the man at the door asked with a smile, "Want to know what they said?" Chen Ping'an nodded and said, "I think so." The middle-aged bachelor was happy and said with a smile, "It's all good words to praise you for your good looks." Chen Ping'an twitched the corners of his mouth, thinking that you think I'm stupid. The man saw through the young man's mind and smiled even more happily. "If you are not stupid, can I let you deliver the letter?" Chen Ping'an didn't dare to refute, for fear that he would annoy this guy, and the copper coins he was about to get would fly away. The man turned his head, looked at those people, stretched out his hand and rubbed Huli's slack chin, and said in a low voice, "That lady just now, her legs can be pinched to death." Chen Ping'an hesitated for a moment, and asked curiously, "That lady has practiced martial arts?" The man was stunned, looked down at the young man, and said solemnly, "You kid, you are really stupid." The young man was confused. He asked Chen Ping'an to wait, and strode towards the house. When he came back, he had a stack of envelopes in his hand, neither thick nor thin, about 10 copies. After the man handed it to Chen Ping'an, he asked, "Stupid people have stupid blessings. Good people are rewarded. Do you believe it?" Chen Ping'an took the letter in one hand, spread his palm in the other, and blinked. It's agreed that a letter is worth a penny. The man became angry and slapped the 5 copper coins he had prepared in advance on the palm of the boy's palm, waved his big hand, and said arrogantly, "If you have 5 coins left, owe it first." The town is not big or small, with more than 600 households. Most of the poor families in the town can be recognized by Chen Ping'an. As for the wealthy families with well-to-do families, the threshold is high, and mud-legged teenagers can't step in. There are some spacious alleys where big families gather together. Alley. Chen Ping'an has never even set foot there. The streets over there are mostly paved with large bluestone slabs, and on rainy days, he will never step on it and splash mud. Those excellent bluestone slabs have been trampled and crushed by people, horses and vehicles for thousands of years, and they have long been rubbed as smooth as a mirror. The 4 surnames, Lu, Li, Zhang, and Song, are common surnames in the small town. The rural school is the money paid by these families. Most of them have 2 or 3 large dragon kilns outside the city. The official residence of the successive kiln supervisors was on the same street as these families. Unfortunately, the 10 letters that Chen Ping'an will send today are almost all well-known wealthy households in the small town. This is also very reasonable. The family background must not be bad. Otherwise, he would not have the confidence to travel far. Among the 9 letters, Chen Ping'an actually went to 2 places, Fulu Street and Taoye Lane. When he stepped on the bluestone board as big as a bed for the first time, the young man was a little apprehensive, slowed down his pace, and felt a little ashamed. "I can't help but feel that my straw sandals are dirty on the street." The first letter sent by Chen Ping'an was from the Lu family, whose ancestors had received a jade ruby from the emperor. When the young man stood at the door, he became more and more uneasy. Wealthy people are very particular about it. Not to mention the Lu family's house. There are also 2 stone lions placed at the door, waiting for others to be high and imposing. Song Jiksen said that this thing can ward off evil and suppress evil. Chen Ping'an doesn't know what evil is at all, but he is just curious that the mouth of the tall lion seems to contain a round stone ball. How is it carved out? Chen Ping'an resisted the urge to touch the stone ball, walked up the steps, and knocked the bronze lion door. He twisted the corner of the envelope with his fingers, and after taking the letter from home, he turned around and walked quickly into the house, closing the door with the painted statue of the god of wealth. After that, the young man's letter delivery process was so bland and unremarkable. On the corner of Taoye Alley, there was an unreputable family. The door was opened by a small old man with a kind-hearted face. "Would you like to come in and take a break and drink some hot water?" The teenager smiled shyly, shook his head, and ran away. The old man put the letter from the family lightly into his sleeve, did not rush back to the house. Looked up into the distance, his vision was cloudy. In the end, the line of sight, from high to low, from far to near, stared at the peach trees on both sides of the street, looking like an old man who was old and faint, and only then squeezed out a smile. The old man turned and left. Not long after, a cute little oriole stopped on the top of a peach branch. Its beak was still tender, and it neighed softly. In the last letter, Qimpingyan needed to send it to the teacher who taught the village school. During this period, he passed a fortune-telling booth. He was a young Taoist priest in an old Taoist robe. The crown is high, like a blooming lotus flower. When the young Taoist saw the young man who was running fast, he quickly said, "Hello, young man. Don't miss it when you pass by. Come and draw a lottery. Pindao can help you calculate a hexagram, which can help you predict good and bad luck." Qimpingyan didn't stop, but turned his head and waved his hand. The Taoist still didn't give up, leaned forward and raised his voice. "Young man, in the past, a poor Taoist would charge 10 cents for unscrambling for someone. But today I will make an exception and only charge you 3 cents. Of course, if you take out one, if you sign up, you might as well add an extra penny. If luck is in your hand and the sign is up, then the poor road will only charge you 5 penny. How about it?" In the distance, Qimpingyan's footsteps clearly paused. The young Taoist had already got up quickly, struck while the iron was hot, and said loudly, "You are the first guest in the early morning, young man, and the poor Taoist will just do it to the end. As long as you sit down and draw lots, to be honest. The poor Tao will write some runes on yellow paper, which can help you pray for the ancestors, accumulate yin virtue. And with the ability of the poor Tao, I dare not say that people will definitely make people a good child of the rich and noble. But I have to say 1 or 2 extra points of blessing. After all, it's a try." Qimpingyan was stunned for a while, then turned back suspiciously, and sat on the bench in front of the stall. A simple Taoist priest, a shabby boy, and 2 paupers, big and small, sat opposite each other. The Taoist smiled and stretched out his hand. Motioning the young man to pick up the lottery, Qimpingyan hesitated, and suddenly said, "I won't draw lots. You just help me write a rune on yellow paper. Will you?" In Qimpingyan's memory, it seems that this young Taoist who has wandered here has been in the town for at least 5 or 6 years, but his appearance has not changed. Fortune-telling, draws lots, and occasionally can write family letters on behalf of others. What's interesting is that there is a lottery tube with bamboo sticks on the table. Over the years, men and women in the town have drawn lots, and no one has ever drawn the lottery. And no one shook out a sign from the lottery tube, as if there were a total of signs, and there were no bad signs in the lottery. Therefore, if it is a holiday, just to get a good fortune, the townspeople can accept it if they spend 10 cents. If this Taoist priest is a complete liar, he would be wronged. The town is so big, if he really only knows how to play tricks and cheat, he would have been kicked out a long time ago. So this year, Tsing Taoist's skill is definitely not in physiognomy and lottery. However, there were some minor illnesses and disasters. Many people were able to recover quickly after drinking a bowl of talisman water from the Taoist, which was quite effective. The young Taoist shook his head and said, "Being a poor Taoist, the old man is not deceived. He agreed to sign and write a talisman together and charge you 5 cents. Qimpingyan retorted in a low voice, "It's 3 cents of money." The Taoist laughed and said, "If I draw out the sign, it will be 5 cents. Qimpingyan made up his mind, stretched out his hand to get the lottery, and suddenly raised his head and asked, "How does the Taoist know that I have 5 cents on me?" The Taoist sat upright and said, "The poor Taoist has always been very accurate when looking at people's good fortune and wealth." Qimpingyan thought about it and picked up the lottery. The Taoist smiled and said, "Young people, don't be nervous. There are times in your life that you must have it eventually, and you should never force it in your life. Seeing impermanence with a normal mind is the first-class all-around law." Qimpingyan put the lottery back on the table, looked solemn, and asked, "Taoist, I will give you all the 5 cents of money, and I will not draw lots. Just ask the Taoist to write the rune on the yellow paper more than usual." "Better. Okay." The Taoist smiled as usual, thought for a moment, nodded, and said, "Yes." On the desk, the ink, and paper were already prepared. The Taoist carefully asked Qimpingyan's parents' name, birthplace, and birth date. He took out a piece of yellow talisman paper and quickly finished writing it in one go. As for what was written, Qimpingyan was at a loss, putting down the pen and picking up the talisman paper. The young Taoist blew the ink. After taking it home, stand inside the threshold and burn the yellow paper outside the threshold. That's all. The young man solemnly took the talisman paper, and after carefully storing it, he did not forget to put the 5 copper coins on the table and bowed his thanks. The young Taoist waved his hand, indicating that the young man was busy with his own affairs. Qimpingyan spread his legs and ran to deliver the last letter. The Taoist leaned lazily on the chair, glanced at the coins, bent down and stretched out his arms to hug them in front of him. At this moment, a small and exquisite oriole flew from the sky onto the table, lightly pecked at a certain copper coin, and soon lost interest and fluttered away. The oriole is about to bring flowers, but the peach blossoms that June's family planted have not yet bloomed. After the Taoist read this poem leisurely, he waved his sleeves in a pretentious manner and sighed. 8 feet in your life. Don't ask for one. With this wave of sleeves, 2 bamboo sticks slipped from the sleeves and fell to the ground. The Taoist sighed and quickly picked them up. Then he looked around furtively and found that no one was paying attention to this side for the time being. The 2 bamboo sticks were tucked into the loose cuffs. The young Taoist coughed, raised his face, and continued to wait for the next guest. He sighed a little. And sure enough, it was easier to make money from women. In fact, There are two bamboo sticks hidden in the sleeves of the young Taoist. One is the top lottery and the other is the bottom lottery, both of which are used to make big money. Not enough for outsiders. Naturally, the young man did not know these mysteries, so he walked lightly all the way to the outside of the village school building, where the nearby bamboo forest was lush and green. Chen Ping'an slowed down, and a middle-aged voice resounded in the house. Sunrise is bright, and lamb's fur is like wet. Then there was a neat and crisp, immature voice. The sunrise is bright, and the lamb's fur is like wet. Chen Ping'an looked up. The sun was rising in the east, and it was shining brightly. The young man was taken aback when he came back to his senses. The Meng Shui boy was shaking his head, and according to the request of the master, he recited a passage proficiently. At the time of Zheijing, the heaven and the earth grow, and all things begin to prosper. Lying at night and walking early, walking widely in the courtyard, the gentleman walked slowly, so as to develop his aspirations. Chen Ping'an stood at the entrance of the school. Hesitating to speak, the middle-aged scholar with slightly frosted temples turned his head to look and walked out of the room gently. Chen Ping'an handed out the letter with both hands and said respectfully, "This is a letter from Mr." After the tall man in the blue shirt took the envelope, he said warmly, "When you have nothing to do in the future, you can come here to listen more often." Chen Ping'an was a little embarrassed. After all, he might not really have time to come here to listen to this gentleman's teaching, and the young man did not want to deceive him. The man smiled and said understandingly, "It doesn't matter. The truth is all in the book. But being a man is outside the book. Go and get busy." Chen Ping'an breathed a sigh of relief and left. After the young man ran out a long way, he turned his head to look back. I saw the gentleman standing at the door all the time, his figure bathed in sunlight, looking from a distance, like a god. If he had never been to Fulu Street or Taoyuan Lane, Chen Ping'an might not have realized the darkness and narrowness of Nipping Lane in his entire life. However, the straw sandal boy not only did not feel lost, but finally felt at ease. The boy smiled and stretched out his hands just in time to touch the yellow mud wall twice with his palms. I remember that about 3 or 4 years ago. Chen Ping'an could only touch it with his fingertips. Mud wall. When he walked to the front of his house, he found the courtyard door wide open, and the teenager, who thought he had been robbed, hurriedly ran into the courtyard, only to see a tall teenager sitting on the threshold with his back against the locked door, yawning boredly, and seeing Chen. After he was safe, he stood up like his butt was burning, ran to Chen Ping'an, clenched Chen Ping's arm tightly, dragged him towards the house, and said in a low voice, "Hurry up and open the door. I have something important to tell you." Chen Ping'an couldn't break free of this guy's shackles, so he had to pull him to open the door of the house. The sturdy young man, 2 years older than him, quickly smashed Chen Ping'an away, tiptoely touched Chen Ping'an's wooden bed. His ears were stuck to the wall, and he heard the base of the wall next door. Chen Ping'an asked curiously, "Liu Xianyang, what are you doing?" The tall boy turned a deaf ear to Chen Ping's question. After about half a stick of incense, Liu Xianyang returned to normal, sitting on the edge of the wooden bed with a complicated expression, both relieved and regretful. Only at this moment did Liu Xianyang realize that Chen Ping'an was doing a strange deed, crouching inside the door, leaning out, burning a piece of yellow paper with only a thumb-sized candle, and the ashes fell outside the threshold. It seemed that Chen Ping'an was still chanting, but it was a little far away, so Liu Xianyang couldn't really hear it. Liu Xianyang is the close disciple of Old Yao Yao, an old-fashioned dragon kiln. As for Chen Ping'an, who is dull in aptitude, the old man never really recognized this apprentice from the beginning to the end in the local area. The apprentice did not worship the teacher's tea, or the master did not drink it. A cup of tea is equivalent to not being a teacher or apprentice. Chen Ping'an and Liu Xianyang are not neighbors, and their ancestral homes are quite far away. The reason why Liu Xianyang would introduce Chen Ping'an to Old Man Yao at that time was because he had a period of old grudges when he was a teenager, before his grandfather died. There was still an elder in the family. After his grandfather passed away, a young man who was as tall as a young man at the age of, or became a troubled devil in the neighborhood. Later, for some unknown reason, Liu Xianyang, he annoyed a group of Liu family's children, and ended up being blocked in the mud bottle alley and beaten hard. The other party was a young man who was in high spirits, and he never cared about the severity of his attack. Liu Xianyang was quickly beaten. He vomited blood, and more than a dozen families living in Mud Bottle Alley were mostly low-level craftsmen, begging for a bowl of rice from Xiaolong Kiln. How dare they mix in this muddy water? At that time, Song Jixin was not afraid at all, but happily squatted on the wall to watch the excitement, lest the world would not be chaotic. In the end, there was only a skinny child who sneaked out of the yard, ran to the alley, and shouted to the street, "Dead! Dead!" Hearing the word dead, the children of the Liu family woke up in horror. They saw Liu Xianyang on the ground covered in blood, and the tall boy was dying. Those rich young men finally felt a little scared. After looking at each other, they ran from the other end of the mud bottle alley, loose. But after that, Liu Xianyang not only didn't appreciate the child who saved his life, but instead came here to play tricks every once in a while, and the orphans were stubborn. Only a year later, when Liu Xianyang saw the little orphan named Chen, he probably couldn't stand the winter. He finally found out in his conscience that the young man who had been apprenticed in Longyao to learn art took the orphan to the building beside Baoxi. Going out of the town to the west of the Dragon Kiln, Liu Xianyang still didn't understand the dozens of miles of mountain road in the snowy day. The little guy who looked like charcoal had legs as detailed as bamboo poles. How did you get to the Dragon Kiln? However, although the old Yao Tu still left Chen Ping'an in the end, he treated the two of them very differently. He also beat and scolded the close disciple Liu Xianyang, but the blind man could also feel the good intentions. Smashed Liu Xianyang's forehead to ooze blood. The young man didn't feel anything because of his thick skin and flesh. Instead, it was the head of old Yao, who was a master. He regretted it very much. What? I ended up going around in circles in my house in the middle of the night, still worried about Liu Xianyang, and finally had to call Chen Ping'an and send Liu Xianyang a bottle of ointment. For so many years, Chen Ping'an has always envied Liu Xianyang. It's not that I envy Liu Xianyang's high talent, strength, and popularity. I just envy Liu Xianyang's fearlessness. He is heartless wherever he goes, and he never feels that living alone is such a bad thing. No matter where Liu Xianyang goes or who he gets along with, he will soon be able to hook shoulders and call each other brothers, drink and punch. Because of his grandfather's poor health, Liu Xianyang was self-reliant very early on and became a king of children. He was skilled at catching snakes, fish, and bird nests. He seemed to be able to do everything, especially in the boy is undoubtedly the best in the town for catching loach and eel fishing on the field ridges in the countryside. In fact, when Liu Xianyang dropped out of the school, that Mr. Qi went to find Liu Xianyang's grandfather, who was on the sickbed, and said that he could not charge a penny. But Liu Xianyang refused to agree, saying that he only wanted to make money and didn't want to study. Mr. Qi said that he could pay Liu Yangxin to be his book boy, but Liu Xianyang still refused to nod. In fact, Liu Xianyang lived quite well, even though old man Yao died and the Dragon Kiln was banned. Within a few days, he was spotted by the blacksmith in Qilong Lane, and he started to build thatched huts and stoves in the south of the town. He was very busy. Liu Xianyang watched Chen Ping'an blow out the candle, put it on the table, and asked in a low voice, "Have you ever heard a strange noise in the morning?" Like, Chen Ping'an sat on the bench and waited for the next sentence. Liu Xianyang hesitated for a moment, then blushed slightly, like a cat meowing in spring. Chen Ping'an asked, "Did Song Jixin learn to meow? Or Zhiggy?" Liu Xianyang rolled his eyes, stopped playing the piano to the cow, put his hands on the bed, slowly bent his elbows, then straightened his arms. His butt was off the bed, and his feet were off the ground. With his butt hanging in the air, he pouted and sneered. What Zhiggy is clearly called Wangju. The surname Song likes to show off since he was a child. I don't know where I saw the word Zhigui, so I used it randomly. It doesn't matter whether the two words mean good or not. Wang Jutan has such a young man. He really did something wrong in his previous life. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to Song Jixin to suffer and suffer. Chen Ping'an did not agree with the tall boy's statement. Liu Xianyang, who had been in that position all the time, snorted coldly. "You really don't understand. Why did you help Wang Ju's girl carry a bucket once? And then she never talked to you again? I'm sure it's Song Jixin's little belly. If you knock over the vinegar bottle, you will threaten Wang Ju not to flirt with you, or else you will have to serve her family. Not only breaking her legs, but also throwing them into the mud bottle alley." Chen Ping'an couldn't listen anymore and interrupted Liu Xianyang's words. "Song Jixin is not bad for her," Liu Xianyang said angrily. "Do you know what's good and what's bad?" Chen Ping'an's eyes were clear and he said softly, "Sometimes she works in the yard, and Song Jixin occasionally sits on the bench and reads his local county annals. When she reads Song Jixin, she often laughs." Liu Xianyang's eyes were dull. Suddenly, the thin wooden bed couldn't support Liu Xianyang's weight. It broke in half, and the tall boy sat on the ground. Chen Ping'an squatted on the ground, holding his head with both heads, sighing, feeling a little headache. Liu Xianyang scratched his head, stood up, and didn't say anything guilty. Just kicked Chen Ping'an lightly and grinned. "Okay, it's just a small broken bed. I'm here today to bring you one. Great news. It's worth more than your broken bed." Chen Ping'an raised his head. Liu Xianyang said triumphantly, "After my master Ruin left the town, he suddenly said that he would dig a few wells by the stream in the south. There were not enough people, and I needed to call for help. So I casually mentioned you and said there is a short winter melon. And the strength is not bad. Master Ruin also agreed to let you pass by yourself in the next 2 days." Chen Ping'an stood up suddenly and was about to say thank you. "Liu," Xianyang raised a palm. "Stop. Stop. Don't say thank you for your kindness. Just keep it in your heart." Chen Ping'an grinned. Liu Xianyang looked around. There was a fishing rod at the corner of the wall. A pair of slingshots was lying on the window, and a wooden bow was hanging on the wall. He strode across the threshold, his boots apparently deliberately bypassing the ashes of the talismans. Chen Ping'an looked at the tall figure. Liu Xianyang suddenly turned around and faced Chen Ping'an at the threshold. The tall boy sat on his waist with his feet on the ground. After taking a few steps straight, he threw a heavy punch, then closed his fist and raised his waist, laughing loudly. "Master Ruin is private? Tell me below. I only need to practice this boxing for a year to kill people." Liu Xianyang didn't seem to be satisfied, so he made a strange kicking motion and said with a smile, It's so good that the legs will go into the crotch, and the kick will suffocate the donkey. Finally, Liu Xianyang stretched out his thumb, pointed to his chest, and said proudly, "When Master Ruin taught me boxing techniques, I had some ideas and experiences. So I chatted with him, such as my unique knowledge of Old Man Yao's porcelain making. Master Ruin praised me as a once-in-a-100-year martial arts prodigy. From now on, you can just follow me, and you will be popular and hot." Out of the corner of Liu Xianyang's eyes, he saw that the maid next door had entered the room, and he suddenly lost his interest in acting as a hero. He said to Chen Ping'an casually, "By the way, when I passed the old locust tree just now, there was an old man calling himself a storyteller over there. If you want to talk to us, you can go take a look when you have time." Chen Ping'an nodded. Liu Xianyang strode away from Mud Bottle Alley. There are many rumors in the town about this rebellious young man who travels alone. But the young man likes to claim that his ancestors were generals who led troops to fight. So his family has the treasured armor that has been passed down from generation to generation. It is said to be treasure armor. Chen Ping'an saw it once with his own eyes. But it actually looks ugly, like a wart on a human body, but also like a scar on an old tree. However, Liu Xianyang's peers don't say that. They only talk about Liu Xianyang's ancestors. They were deserters. They fled to the town and became their son-in-law. Fortunately, they escaped the government's pursuit. To be sure, he seemed to have seen with his own eyes how Liu Xianyang's ancestors escaped from the battlefield and how they fled all the way to this small town. Chen Ping'an thought for a while, crouched beside the threshold, and lowered his head to blow away the ashes. Song Jiksen didn't know when he was standing on the side of the courtyard wall with his maid Jigui next to him, and he shouted, "Would you like to go to the locust tree with us to play?" Chen Ping'an raised his head. "I won't go." Song Jiksen twitched the corners of his mouth. "It's boring." He turned his head and smiled at his maid. "Jigui, let's go. Go and buy you a whole jar of peach pollen from the general's stomach," she shyly said. "A small cricket jar is enough." After Song Jiksen put his hands on his shoulders, he held his head high and strode forward. "My Song family, Zhongming Dingji, and hairpins for generation. How can I be small? Isn't it a disgrace to the family?" Chen Ping'an sat on the threshold and rubbed his forehead. In fact, when Song Jiksen didn't say those weird nonsense, he didn't feel bad. But at such a time, if Liu Xianyang was present, he would definitely say that he really wanted to. The back of Chao Song Jiksen's head was knocked down with a brick. Chen Ping'an leaned against the door of the house, thinking about tomorrow's situation. Most likely it will be like today, the day after tomorrow. It will be like tomorrow, and so on. So Chen Ping'an will go on like this all his life, until he is about the same as old Yao in the end. People eat soil for a lifetime. And soil eats people once? Finally, close your eyes and open them again. It may be the next life. The boy looked down at the straw sandals on his feet, and suddenly laughed. Stepping on the bluestone slab is not the same as stepping on the mud flat. Liu Xianyang left the alley and passed the fortune-telling booth when the young Taoist recruited him. "Come on. The poor Taoist looks like you are cooking oil. It is definitely not a good omen. But don't be afraid. There is a way for the poor Taoist to help you get rid of the disaster." Liu Xianyang was a little surprised. He remembered that this Taoist priest used to unravel fortune-telling for people, not to mention whether it was accurate or not. But this person really never took the initiative to solicit business, and almost all of them belonged to volunteers. Could it be that the dragon kiln is now closed to the imperial government? And this Taoist priest will also be unlucky, unable to open the pot, so he would rather kill it by mistake than place it by mistake. Liu Xianyang laughed and scolded. "Your method is to destroy wealth and eliminate disasters, right? Fuck your uncle. You want to cheat money from my pocket. In the next life?" The young Taoist was not annoyed, and shouted to the tall boy, "I hope that this year Pepsi will be prosperous. Who knows that there will be disasters in my life? No disasters are not willing to recite the gods. If you want to be safe, you should burn incense. You should burn incense." Liu Xianyang turned around suddenly, and ran to the fortune-telling booth with quick steps. The Taoist was obviously frightened, and after getting up, he didn't care about the stall, and ran away with his head in his arm. Liu Xianyang stood beside the booth, looked at the embarrassed figure of the Taoist, laughed loudly, caught a glimpse of the lottery on the table, and pushed it down at will. The bamboo stick slid out of the lottery, finally showing a fan shape on the table. Liu Xianyang pointed at the Taoist, who stopped in the distance. "I'll see you fight once again." The young Taoist clasped his fists and bowed, begging for mercy. Liu Xianyang just gave up. The young Taoist waited until the tall and young man walked away before he dared to take his seat again, and sighed. The world is hard, and people's hearts are not ancient, making it difficult for the poor to make a living. At this moment, the Taoist's eyes lit up. He quickly closed his eyes, and said in a clear voice, "The pond is full of frog, and the sound of frogs piercing people's stomachs is the heart. This place is famous for its fame, and it is only suitable for the wind to move in all directions." The pair of teenagers and girls obviously heard the words of the Taoist, but unfortunately they did not intend to stop. The Taoist opened his eyes slightly, and seeing that he was about to miss out on business again, he had to slap the table and raise his voice. "Zhuang Yin is a child of the world, and the Prime Minister is nothing more than a worldly person. God." Song Jiksen and her maid Jigui just moved on. The Taoist was disheartened and muttered in a low voice, "This day will not pass." The young man turned his head without warning, threw a copper coin to the young Taoist from a distance, and said with a bright smile, "Lend you auspicious words?" The Taoist hurriedly caught the copper coin, spread out his palm and looked at it, frowning. It was the smallest amount of money, but the young Taoist gently placed the copper coin on the table. In an instant, a oriole fell on the table, lowered its head, and lightly pecked at the copper coin. After that, it held it in its mouth and looked up at the young Taoist. People are no different. The Taoist said softly, "Go! You shouldn't stay here for a long time." The oriole disappeared in a flash. The young Taoist looked around, and finally stopped at the tall archway in the distance, which happened to be facing the 4-character plaque of Chichong bullfighting, and said with emotion, "It's a pity." Finally, the Taoist added, "If you can sell it outside, why would you have 800 taels of silver?" Song Jiksen brought his maid, Jigui, to the old locust tree, and found that the shade of the tree was overcrowded. With nearly 100 people sitting on the benches and chairs that he had moved from his own house, Song Jiksen stood side by side with her on the edge of the shade, and saw an old man standing under the tree, holding a big white bowl in one hand, and leaning behind his back in the other, with a passionate expression on his face, and he said loudly, "I just said the general direction of the dragon's veins. I will tell you later." Speaking of this real dragon, this is really amazing. About 3,000 years ago, a terrific immortal figure appeared in the world, the 3-foot spirit in his hand, showing his sharpness. I don't know why, but this person is at odds with Jiaolong. For 300 springs in autumn, there are Jiaolongs who slay Jiaolong, and there are no real dragons in the world. It is said that he went to a very high place where Taoism is based, and sat and discussed Taoism with the Taoist ancestor. Disastrous. The old gentleman spit all over, and all the people in the small town below were indifferent, and everyone's faces were blank. The maid asked curiously in a low voice, "What is the 3-foot spirit?" Song Jiksen smiled and said, "It's the sword." The maid said angrily, "Young master, this old man likes to show off his studies, so he doesn't speak well." Song Jiksen glanced at the old man and gloated, "There are not many literate people in our town, and this storyteller is a wink at the blind man." The maid asked again, "What is the blessed land of the cave? Is there really anyone in the world who can live to be 300 years old? And the Fengdu underworld? Isn't it a place only the dead can go?" Song Jiksen was questioned, but he didn't want to show his cowardice, so he said casually, "It's all nonsense. I guess I have read a few unsavory barnyard officials and unofficial history and used it to fool the villagers." At this moment, Song Jiksen noticed the old man keenly and glanced at him intentionally or unintentionally. Although it was just a glimpse of water, it quickly passed by, but Song Jiksen still carefully captured it. But the young man did not pay attention, just treated it as a coincidence. The maid raised her head to look at the old locust tree, and the tiny bits of light shone through the gaps in the leaves, and she narrowed her eyes subconsciously. Song Jiksen turned his head to look, suddenly stunned. Now this maid of mine has a profile face that has just started to lose baby fat. She seems to have a big difference from the thin, shriveled maid in memory, according to the custom of the small town. When a woman gets married, she will hire a blessed person who has both parents and children alive, and ask her to wring the fluff from the bride's face, cut her forehead hair and temples, which is called open face, or raise your eyebrows. Song Jiksen also heard from the book that there is no custom in a small town, so when Jigui was 12 years old, he bought the best new brewed wine in the town, and moved out the porcelain bottle that was secretly hidden. It is extremely beautiful, like a green plum. After pouring the wine into it, it is carefully sealed with mud, and finally buried in the ground. Song Jiksen suddenly said, "Jigui, although the guy surnamed Chen, according to the saying of our scholar ancestors, belongs to dead wood can't be carved, and a wall of dung can't be plastered. But no matter what, he is still doing it in his life, something meaningful." The maid didn't answer. She lowered her eyebrows, faintly visible eyelashes trembling slightly. Song Jiksen said to himself, "Chen Ping'an. He is not bad, but his temper is too rigid, and he only knows what to do, so being a potter means that no matter how hard he works, he is destined to be unable to do anything. Good things come with spiritual energy." So Lu Shanyang's master, the old man Yao, doesn't look down on Chen Ping'an. He has a unique vision, which is called rotten wood and can't be carved. As for the wall of dung, the general meaning is that speaking of a poor and sour ghost like Chen Ping'an, even if you put on a dragon robe for him, he is still a rustic mud-leg. When Song Jiksen said this, he laughed at himself. "I'm actually worse than Chen Ping'an." She didn't know how to comfort her son. Song Jiksen and his maid, in this small town, have always been the rich people of Fulu Street and Taoye Lane. They have important conversations after tea and dinner. This is thanks to Song Jiksen's cheap dad, Song Jiksen. Grown-ups. There are no big figures in the town, and there are no turmoil. So the kiln supervisor, appointed by the imperial court here, is undoubtedly the kind of Qingtian master in the playbook, among the dozens of supervisors in history. The senior supervisor, Mr. Song, who made an official, won the hearts of the people. Unlike those high-ranking officials and lords before, Mr. Song not only did not hide in the official office, cultivated his moral, nor thanked guests behind closed doors. Make matters, everything must be done by yourself. It is better than a craftsman. The kiln worker is more like a villager for more than 10 years. The originally bookish Mr. Song has been tanned and shiny. He usually dresses like a farmer. The imperial porcelain produced by Zhenlong Kiln is not satisfactory in terms of glaze, color, and appearance, or the shape of large and small pieces. To be precise, it is even slightly inferior to the previous level. The heads were puzzled. In the end, the court probably felt that the conscientious Lord Song had no credit or hard work, so he transferred him back to the official edict of the capital and got a good evaluation. Before returning to Beijing, Mr. Song ran out of money and invested in the construction of a covered bridge. Later, when he found out that Mr. Song had left the motorcade without taking a child with him, several famous people in the town suddenly realized it can be said that Mr. Song and the town have accumulated a good incense relationship, and with the deliberate care of the current inspector, the young Song Jiksin has lived in the town these years, without worry about food and clothing, and at ease. The maid, who is now renamed Jigui, there are different opinions about her origins. The local people living in Naiping Alley said that it was a winter with heavy snow, and a girl from other places was begging along the road until she passed out in the courtyard of Song Jiksin's house. At the door, if someone hadn't discovered it early, he would have to go to the place where he was reincarnated and reincarnated. The old man who does chores at the official office has another theory, and he swears that it is an orphan bought by Master Song from another place in his early years, in order to find a person who knows the warmth and coldness of his illegitimate son Song Jiksin to make up for the lack of father and son. Acknowledged debt. In any case, after the maid was named Jiggy by the young man, it was considered that the father-son relationship between the two was completely confirmed, because the big family in the small town knew that Lord Song loved one inkstone most, and the word Jigui was engraved on it. Song Jiksin regained his senses and smiled brightly. I don't know why. I think of that deadly four-legged snake, Jigui. What do you think? I threw it into Chen Ping'an's yard, and it still wants to run to our house? You said that Chen Ping'an's kennel must be so unpopular that it is so shabby that even a small snake is unwilling to enter it. The maid thought about it seriously, and replied, some things are also about fate, right? Song Jiksin stretched out his thumb and said cheerfully, that's the truth. He, Chen Ping'an, is a person with a shallow fate, so he can be content if he is alive. She did not speak. Song Jiksin said to himself, after we leave the town, the things in the house will be taken care of by Chen Ping'an. Will this guy guard himself and steal? The maid said softly, young master, isn't it? Song Jiksin smiled and said, yo, Jigui, do you understand what it means to guard yourself against theft? The maid blinked those long eyes of autumn water. Isn't it literal? Song Jiksin smiled and looked towards the south, showing a hint of yearning. I heard that there are more books in the capital than the flowers and trees in our town. At this moment, the storyteller was saying, although there are no real dragons in the world, the subordinates of dragons, such as Zhao, Qiu, Qi, etc., are still truly and truly living in the human world. Maybe the old man deliberately sold it for a while. Seeing that the audience was indifferent and didn't know how to cheer, he could only continue to say, maybe it will be hidden by our side. Taoist gods call it Qianlong Zayuan. Song Jiksin yawned. A locust leaf suddenly fell from the top of the head, green and dripping, and it just fell on the boy's forehead. Song Jiksin stretched out his hand to grab the leaf and twisted the petiole with his fingers. The young man, who was thinking about going to the east gate of the city to collect his debts when he was approaching the old locust tree, also saw the locust leaves falling in front of him. But he quickened his pace and wanted to reach out to catch it. It was just a breeze, and the leaves slid past him. The youth with straw sandals has a sturdy figure and quickly takes a step laterally, trying to intercept this leaf, but the leaves swirled again in the air. The young man did not believe in evil. He tossed and turned several times, but in the end, he still failed to catch the locust leaf. The young Chen Ping'an was helpless. A teenage boy and youth who played truant at the school passed by Chen Ping'an. The young man in the green shirt didn't know it himself, and there was a locust leaf on his shoulder. Chen Ping'an continued to go to the east gate of the city, even if he couldn't get the money. It would be good to urge him. Over at the fortune-telling booth in the distance, the young Taoist closed his eyes and muttered to himself. Who said that the cycle of luck has no thickness?